Thank you for that kind introduction. I wish my mom and my dad were here. My mom would have believed every word. My dad would have been surprised, so it's fantastic. Anyway, I also want to thank you, Mark, before I get to my talking points. I want to thank you and the team for putting together an amazing agenda this year. It's incredible. I said this is the third time I've had the chance to come, and I think this by far is going to exceed anyone's expectations. In 3 short years, you and your team have taken the Campbell Trophy Summit and transformed it into one of the must-attend events in the country. And for those of you who are in the room, I promise that is not a statement of hyperbole. We've had countless numbers of people ask how they can buy a ticket and get into this event, including last night when I was coming to the reception. So, Mark, I want to thank you for that. Now, I shared with those who attended last year, that's what makes this event so special. You can't buy your way in to the Campbell Trophy Summit. You can get here only one way. You have to earn it. And each and every one of you did just that. But you're here this year not just because of what you've already achieved. You're here because of what you are capable of achieving. Mark Twain once said the 2 most important days in your life are the day that you're born and the day that you discover why. And the comments I want to share with you this morning are how you can discover your why. And I'm going to unpack the lessons and apply them to my own journey. Then I'm going to wrap up by sharing with you how it applies to Bill Campbell and how it applies to everyone in this room, regardless of what stage of life you're in. And I'll start by sharing that, as Mark just referenced, in January, 8 months ago, I stepped down from the job of a lifetime, serving as the 5th CEO of Intuit, a job that Bill Campbell once held, and a job that I had the privilege of serving in for 11 years. And while it was the job of a lifetime, I knew when I took it, it could not be the job for a lifetime. Like every chapter in our life, the end date was inevitable. And I had one goal when I became CEO, be a part of choosing that end date. So I had spent years in advance working with our board, trying to identify the best candidates who could succeed as the CEO, and then working on a smooth transition. And in the final days of December, I was feeling really good. Things were moving along, and I was pretty sure I knew how I was going to spend my days in the next chapter. I wanted to serve on public company boards. I wanted to continue to coach young individuals who had aspirations to reach for things they thought were never possible. And I wanted to spend more time with my family. And come January 1st, my muscle memory kicked in. I got out of bed at 5:30 in the morning to do P90X like I've done for 12 years. I watched the opening bell of CNBC. I read the Wall Street Journal. I got in my car. I drove to my office to be the executive chairman, the same role, as Mark said, Bill turned into when he stepped down from CEO. And I began to fill my days with meetings until 7 o'clock p.m. And I was just as busy in January as I had been as a CEO, but something was missing. And by March, I was truly feeling rudderless and lost. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't second-guessing my decision to step down. In fact, every day that went by, I was more certain that I'd made the right decision and it was the right time. The company was thriving. My successor was doing even better things than anyone could have ever imagined, certainly more capable than me. But I didn't realize how to keep score anymore. For 16 years working at Intuit, 11 years as a CEO, I got out of bed with one single definition of success: to advance the company's mission. And now I got out of bed as an executive chairman. I didn't know what my mission was other than not get in the way of the new guy. And so I went on a vision quest. I went out to interview people who were further along in their life journey than me, who were enjoying incredible second chapters. And I wanted to understand what choices they had made earlier in their lives that helped them get to this next chapter. These individuals, by the way, were in their mid to late 70s, and they are the names you would recognize because they're out in the press, and they were humble enough to meet a young guy like me, relative to them young, much older than you, and would share with me their wisdom. And I'm going to tell you that what I learned blew me away. Their answers were amazingly consistent. Simply stated, they took the time to discover their why. Now, they were quick to say, Brad, how you choose to fill your days is simply a means to an end. The question you have to answer is, what do you want it all to add up to? So, of course, I asked, well, how do you discover your why? I interviewed all of them, and what emerged was a blueprint. And I'm going to share that blueprint with you now because I wish I would have had it in my 20s and my 30s. So let me start with first sharing what it is not. Over the years, like many of you, I suspect you've gotten pretty self-aware. We've all had coaches and managers. We've all watched game film. We've all had performance reviews. We've all had players and peers give us feedback. So we have a pretty good sense of our strengths and our weaknesses. But these individuals said, discovering your why has nothing to do with your strengths and weaknesses. You have to reflect back on your life to date, no matter how far along in the journey you are, and you have to answer 4 questions. And these are the 4 questions. First, what have you sacrificed to date to get to where you are that you regret, and you now want to prioritize and give it its just due in the next chapter? So sacrifices that you've made to date that you now want to prioritize higher. The second, when have you found yourself performing at your peak, full of passion and purpose? And think about the characteristics of that situation. The third, in what environments do you find that you are optimal, that you perform at your best? And then the fourth, in what environments do you find you are suboptimal and you do not perform at your best? Now I'm going to walk through each of those 4 questions, and I'm going to use my own example to share with you the kinds of things you can learn. So armed with those questions, I went on a journey to try to figure out if I could discover my why. The first question, what did I sacrifice to date on this rapid rise to try to become a CEO, and then for 11 years to run an amazing company with a group of unbelievably talented people? And the answer was standing right beside me in my home, my wife. She had done an amazing job of helping us raise 2 beautiful girls, build a beautiful home, give up her own career as an attorney, and support me. And while we had fulfilled our dreams together and everything we had was ours, we had always wanted to do something together. We wanted to build something together. And I wanted to prioritize that higher. The second is we wanted to spend more time with our daughters. They just graduated from university. More time with our mothers who are aging. And I want to spend more time with our siblings who are on the other side of the country. So the first big priority here, you could tell, was primarily around family and doing something with my spouse. The second question was harder to answer. When I look back over my life and I think about the things where I had the most passion and purpose, what kind of theme emerged? But I took the time to write it all down, and a pattern did emerge. I went all the way back to childhood. I remember the pride I felt when I got selected to be a safety patrol guard. I don't know if they have that anymore. It's like a crossing guard where you get to have a little badge and you help your friends cross the street. I was so pumped that I was a safety patrol guard. And then I remember when I was a lifeguard and I got assigned to the youth end of the pool where the kids hadn't learned to swim, and I felt this responsibility of taking care of these kids that if they fell in could really get hurt. And then I loved as a martial artist being the person that helped an individual, whether they were young or old, develop self-confidence and self-defense techniques. And then I remember how I felt in the 8th grade when one of my friends from kindergarten summons the courage to come out as gay. And I stood behind him as an ally in a very small rural town who, quite frankly, wasn't open-minded. And then I can remember to this day when I summons the courage to stand up against a bully myself in the 9th grade, and I lost. But I went home and my dad told me he was proud of me for facing my fears, and that's when I enrolled in martial arts. But one of the themes of my childhood was pretty clear. I liked to see individuals who were up against the odds and stand with them. Then I looked at my career. The same thing carried forward. I loved working with individuals and families who struggle to make it paycheck to paycheck. I love working with small businesses who dare to dream but 50% fail in the first 5 years. And I love working in geographic regions known as the overlooked zip codes, where their communities are fighting opioid addiction. They're trying to find a way to reinvent their industry from a coal mine to something else, and they want to try to create a better tomorrow for the next generation. My theme, by looking back, is clear. I like to fight for the underdog and tilt the odds of favor in their success. Third and fourth questions. The third one, in what environments do I find that I perform the best? I personally am a glutton for punishment. I love that Marine commercial where it shows the dust blowing across the sand and all the citizens running this way and the Marines running to it, and they say we run to danger. That's me. I love to go after intractable problems that everybody else thinks is unsolvable and work with a team of people to find a new tomorrow. And I love to coach. I love to work with individuals to optimize their individual ability and to build team capability. And then last but not least, what environments do I not find myself optimal? I'll be honest, I can't stand opinion-based debates. I like to have them grounded in facts. I don't like things that are so focused on process and procedure that they move, and you can time it with a farmer's almanac instead of a stopwatch. It's just too slow moving for me. And I don't like things where you can't measure success. So if you boil it down in 90 days, because of this process, I was able to get to an amazing, transformative idea. I now knew what my why was. And this is what it is. And this is how I've put a plan together to go after it. And then I'll talk about how it applies to Bill Campbell and you. First of all, my why. I want to be a champion for the overlooked and the underserved. I want to continue to be a warrior for human dignity and human potential. And I want to tilt the odds of success in their favor for anyone who has the hunger to try. Now, how we're going to do that is my wife and I have just developed a new foundation together. We call it the One Wing Foundation. It's in reference to Eleanor Roosevelt's quote in the Great Depression when she said, "We're all born angels with one wing, and the way we fly is by holding on to one another." The One Wing Foundation is focused on the two great equalizers, education and entrepreneurship. And we're focused on driving education and entrepreneurship in those communities where individuals have lost hope. And the problem we're going to fight, that big dust coming across the desert, we're going to fight what is called the 75% reality. J.D. Vance described it in the Hillbilly Elegy. The 75% reality is in these regions, 75% of parents believe their kids will not have it as good as they did. That's the first time a generation has said that since before the Great Depression. The second 75% reality is the jobs created in these areas come from small businesses and startups, not Amazon, Microsoft, or Intuit. But the third 75% reality is 75% of venture capital money last year went to California, New York, and Massachusetts. While God was egalitarian in handing out talent, economies are not equally egalitarian in handing out jobs. And the One Wing Foundation is going to try to change that reality. So that is what we're doing from a family perspective. Now, I'm also going to continue to serve as Intuit's executive chairman, because just as Bill got to do when he created things like this opportunity, I have an opportunity to also work with our foundation there. And what we focus on at Intuit is looking at disadvantaged communities and trying to create job growth and financial literacy in families so they can live to have a better tomorrow. So it's perfectly aligned with my why, and I'm going to stay engaged there. Beyond that, have you all heard of John Chambers? John Chambers was the CEO of Cisco, a big technology company here in the Valley. He was also a fellow West Virginian. He and I have now partnered, and we are working on something called Startup West Virginia. What is that? We've gone out and studied countries and cities that have reinvented themselves and have risen from the ashes. Countries like Ireland, who 3 decades ago suffered from addiction. The industry went out from under their feet, and their youth left the country and wanted to go everywhere like London, and they didn't want to stay there. And they put together a multifaceted plan. They're now known as the Celtic Tiger, the fastest growing economy in all of Europe. And we're studying Pittsburgh and Detroit. Dan Gilbert and the team reinventing Detroit and making it one of the technology-forward company or cities in the country. And then finally, I'll wrap up with Marshall University, my alma mater. I think everybody knows that. For those who don't know, I was 6 years old and the airport was located in my hometown when the plane crashed. My brothers and I all went to Marshall. We still wear our rings to this day. My wife and I have been giving back to Marshall, but we've been taking the Silicon Valley techniques back to Marshall, and they're reinventing the entire business school to teach entrepreneurial skills for the 21st century. So that is basically the combination of me talking to these individuals in their 70s and asking them, what do you wish you would have known earlier? And then me sitting down for 90 days and reflecting. And what came out of that was a new purpose for me in this next chapter. How does that relate to you? And how does that relate to Bill Campbell? Well, all that thinking got put to the test 2 weeks ago. I was having dinner in Palo Alto with one of my friends who's currently the CEO of a company here in the Valley, a really well-known company. And I was walking him through this journey because everybody wants to know what it's like on the other side. Hey man, is there really something on the other side? Let me know. And this is the other side for those who are still gainfully employed. I'm on the other side. And he said, hey, what's it like? And so I took him through the journey. And he said, that is incredible. I tell you what you need to do. You need to be a public company CEO again. Because then you have a big platform like you did at Intuit, and you can go out and you can do all kinds of things, and you'll have money and you can sponsor lots of things. And as those words left his lips, I felt a wave of nausea coming over me. And he went home, and I went home, and I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I came into my office in Palo Alto, and I was staring down at my desk, and on the corner of my desk is a copy of The $1 Trillion Coach. If you haven't read it yet, I think you'll be hearing a lot more about it here at the summit. It's a story about Bill Campbell and his leadership lessons, his playbook. And as I was looking at that picture of Bill on that cover, it hit me. Bill Campbell did not have the impact on the world that he had because he was associated with Apple or Google or Intuit or Amazon or Chegg or any of the other companies that can lay claim to him. In fact, to the contrary, those companies became who they were and those leaders became who they were because of Bill Campbell. Bill Campbell didn't need a platform. Bill Campbell became the platform. And for those of you who don't know about Bill, Bill loved to teach through stories and parables. And one of his favorite stories was one that I also love, which is the legend of King Arthur, a leader who led through serving others, through a round table of equals, all bound by a higher purpose, and reminded themselves every day of the secret they discovered when they lost their way, the secret of the Holy Grail. And if you've ever read King Arthur or you've watched any of these newer versions of it, the secret of the Grail was very simply, that which you seek in life cannot be found. It must be made. The land and the king are one. Now, if you translate that into modern language, what's that mean? Be the change in the world that you want to see. Be the change in the world you want to see. 16 years of Bill coaching me. And here I was lost. And then I stare down and I see his picture 4 years after he's moved on to a higher realm. And I hear him gruffly whispering into my ear, God damn it, be the change you seek to be. That was what Bill was telling me. And now that takes me to you. Bill Campbell was the platform of change. The William V. Campbell Trophy is the platform of change. You are an elite group of individuals. You're here not only because of what you've already accomplished, but what potential you have to create and change in the world. I hope you will take the time at whatever stage you are in your life to reflect on those 4 questions now and get really clear about your why. I hope you'll be a platform and change in whatever role you serve in from now until your end. And I hope you put your dent in the universe just the way Bill Campbell did. This summit will give you a lot of good ideas on how to do that. And with that, I thank you for the privilege of being able to come and speak with this group again. You remind me of Bill. Thank you. And now I believe we have the chance to do, I'm sorry, Mark?
Question, if somebody
Yes.
has questions, we could grab some microphones. If anybody has a question,
Yeah.
Brad, we have a few minutes, so is that...
Yeah, I had purposely tried to do 15 of talk and 15 of Q&A, and I hope you have questions. By the way, somebody reminded me last year, I don't know if you remember if you were here, I came here and spoke in the morning and couldn't say anything, obviously, but then that afternoon had the earnings call at 1:30 and announced my retirement. So it's very serendipitous that I'm here talking about discovering my why after retirement when last year I was here just before my announcement of retirement. But anyway, questions on anything about Bill, about leadership? Yes?
Yeah, the point 3 and point 4 about finding environments where you perform your best
Yeah.
and environments where you're suboptimally. How do you balance challenging yourself, putting yourself in environments where maybe you need to grow?
Yeah.
Maybe you're suboptimal today, but you need to grow versus putting yourself in that position to be most successful.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's always this notion of continuous improvement, but there's also this notion that there are environments where all of us have these, if you go Myers-Briggs and you have these different color tests, there are things when you are self-actualizing that you're able to consciously be competent. You think about it and you get better, and then under stress you kind of regress back to this baseline level. In those environments that always have you on stress and you're regressing to a baseline level, you're very seldom able to get into that self-actualization. So you want to think about environments where, it's kind of like, I guess, in football, There are certain systems that some people perform better in. Quarterbacks were better in a certain system than another. You always want to continue to perfect your craft, but you also want to try to find the system in which you know you are best optimized for. So it is a fine line. It's not about stopping your personal growth, but it's also recognizing there's some environments where you just aren't going to be your best for whatever reason. And it's a hard thing, and that's one of the things that Henry Kravis from KKR shared with me. He said most people think strengths and weaknesses, but you really have to think about your environments. And if you have enough time on the clock, you'll look back and see environments where no matter how hard you tried, you just weren't as good. And other environments, when you tried that hard, you were excellent. And try to go into those kinds of environments. Does that help understand the distinguishing factor? Yeah, it's a great question because you always have to continue to develop and stress yourself. Yes?
When you're evaluating your strengths and weaknesses, did you do that only internally, or did you ask other people for how they view you?
Oh, external, for sure. I love Mark Twain's other quote, which is never ask the actor how the play went, ask the audience. Yeah, so I am all about, so 360, I've had an executive coach for 16 years, the same one actually that Bill referenced for the company to use, so a lot of our people in the company use them. He does a 360 on me every year as external stakeholders. When I went through this process, I went and asked people when they felt that I was at my best. I didn't just think about it myself, and so this reflective period was a two-way process. It was inside out and outside in. Those that would be radically candid. I didn't need any fanboys and fangirls. I wanted someone that would look at me and say, brother, I love you, but I tell you, you are broken when you're in this environment. And sometimes it's hard to hear because you look back and you say, well, I actually thought I did pretty well that year. Nah, you didn't. Yeah. Yes?
You used to have Bill to lean on when you were in a really tough spot or something you didn't know how to go through. Is there someone in particular you work with now, or is it a network? How do
Yeah.
if something happens and you need a quick guidance on something, what's your go-to?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have to say, there were 2 times in my life where I felt a tremendous void when it came to coaching. The first was when my father passed unexpectedly in 1996, and the second's when we lost Bill, because Bill was like that second figure in my life personally. And the first thing I can say is they both reinforced the notion of learn from everybody. And so I really am, I tease, I say I'm the world's greatest thief of good ideas. I've never had an original idea. So I borrow from everyone. But when it comes to that big void, like my dad or Bill, the thing I've fallen back on now is the mirror test. And the mirror test is, it becomes a crutch when you have them a phone call away. When they're no longer a phone call away, you have to go inside and say, what is it they would have said to me in this moment? And stare yourself in the mirror and say, am I doing that? And so I call that the mirror test now. And so that's what was amazing about that moment when I looked down at the $1 trillion coach. I was lost and I truly heard Bill. And I'm not trying to be spiritual about it. I simply remembered the messages he would reinforce to me because in 11 years as a CEO, there were dark moments. And when you go see Bill, you didn't get the hug and the cuddle. You got the, what are you talking about? Dust yourself off and get up, man. I'm from Homestead, Pennsylvania. You're from Canova, West Virginia. We came out of the mines and out of the steel mills. We know how to do this. And that's what gets you back up. So the mirror test. Yes?
Yeah, you described this 90-day period where you discovered the why for like the sunset period of your life.
Yeah.
What motivated you before?
What's funny is I wished I would have done this in my 20s. I can assure you that this conversation I have with you, I've had with both of my daughters now. Because it applies at any stage in your life. And what happens is you start to see patterns. You happen to see these things. My mom and dad would say, I knew from when you were a kid, you used to give speeches to your G.I. Joes. And you'd walk around with this stick in your hand, and we teased and called you Moses, and dogs and cats would follow you, but nobody else. And, I didn't know what that meant. And then I started to look at these things, safety patrol guard, being responsible, those kinds of things. And so I would say don't wait till this stage of my life. Mid-50s, some people in their 70s say you're still a young man, and you're sitting here like me and going, man, I've kind of let 2/3 of my chapters go. I would do this earlier. And you can really start to see the patterns. I think I could write it for both of my daughters, but what's important is they need to think about it and write it for themselves. Yes?
Do you think if you did this earlier in your career, you may have taken a different trajectory in terms of a different, maybe not the CEO got into it, maybe you became a life coach or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there would have been choices that I have gone back and said all along, what mistakes have you made in your career? And I've made a lot of mistakes. Sometimes they were career decisions. And I've kind of described them as, I had a principle of what I should do. I should never take a job for the money, and that time I took a job for the money. With this new lens, as I looked back, I realized it wasn't just the money situation, it was the environment. It was the environments where I did not optimize my capabilities. So I'm not sure, for example, I think it still would have led me to Intuit. I have to say, everyone said, why did you stay for 16 years at Intuit? And I'm still there, so I'm not gone. I'm still on the payroll and still the chairman. As soon as I showed up at Intuit, I said to Bill and Scott Cook, our founder, I feel like I'm home. It's the values I grew up in. It's the team spirit that Bill taught, that my dad taught when he was my Little League football coach. It's everything I've already experienced. It just happens to be in California. And by the way, they fight for families who are trying to put food on the table and small businesses who are trying to actually make a living. And they actually put all their philanthropy into the overlooked zip codes and the areas that everybody else doesn't want to think about because they want to think about the coast. I couldn't have written a better why or a better job than Intuit. So I think I would have found Intuit, but I probably would have bypassed a few other things along the way. But that's what life's about. You make mistakes. And I'm not sure, by the way, with this clarity, if I still wouldn't have made mistakes, because you do have to test the bounds. But I can say with hindsight being 20/20, I sure would have made some different choices. Yes? Go ahead.
Think about things you sacrificed that you might regret. Would you do anything differently had you been analyzing this yearly with your wife and your daughter?
Yes, I would have. Two-part answer. One was I tried in my life to have a definition of crystal moments and rubber moments, which I shared with some of you last year, I believe. And that's how to know when to say, hey, there's a board meeting at Intuit, but there's a homecoming with my daughter. There's only one homecoming she's going to be going to. Which one do I do? And rubber moments are when there's 30 soccer games or 15 football games in a season, and your kid's going to be upset if you miss one, but there's going to be another 11 or another 29. You want to say to those, look, sometimes I got to miss one, but I'll be back for the rest. But if it's a homecoming or a birth, you never miss those crystal moments. I thought that was going to be enough. But what I didn't realize is when you have a couple and then you start to put your energy into raising kids and building a home, you start to develop parallel lives. And we always had date night, and that kept us going, so that's why we still have a strong marriage. But we had promised each other for 26 years, hey, we're going to build something together. We're going to take her attorney skills and mine, and we never did anything but talk about it. So I wished in hindsight we would have started that sooner and not have to wait till now and start to do it. So I think whatever you and your spouse or your significant other are talking about, start to put some action behind the words now. That's what I wish we would have done.
One last question.
Yep. Yes.
You said it took you about 3 months to figure this out, and I was just wondering, how did you know you had reached the final answer after spending about 90 days trying to figure this out?
That is the perfect question to wrap this up. In this process, I also have a supporting document that says these are the things I won't do, and one of them is I won't be a public company CEO again. And one of my friends, John Donahoe, who led eBay, was a CEO of Bain and when retired, and after 19 months just came back as the CEO of a company called ServiceNow, told me never say never. He said, you're going to have to create the conditions where just describe to the recruiters, don't call me unless it's this, and give them 2 or 3 names as examples. So I did. I actually said, okay, 5% probability that I'll ever put on another jersey. I don't want to be one of those athletes that retired. I'm not going to get anybody upset, but retired one, plays 2 more teams, and you wish they would have stayed in that uniform. And so I gave this person 3 names. I thought it was a confidential discussion, but I appreciated the intent that's about to unfold. I said, okay, here's 3 companies for you, and I threw them out. I mean, companies that are big, dreaming companies. In the last 2 weeks, 2 calls came that said, hey, actually there's going to be a change, and would you be interested in talking about it? That was not my wife's reaction. I went home, we talked about it at the dinner table, I slept, I called and said, nah, I don't want to be a CEO. So the acid test is when you get put to the moment where you now have to say, am I going to stay true to this or not? And I can tell you with clear eyes and a full heart, I am super excited about the next chapter. And if I can be 50% of what Bill Campbell did, I will have lived a fulfilled life. Thank you.